your response to the notion that unguided bombs can be dropped in a precise way? And is Israel using these weapons because they don't have enough precision guided bombs in their arsenal?
Well, I certainly agree that unguided weapons can be used in an accurate way in certain circumstances. But we're talking here about 10 to 15,000 unguided bombs being dropped in one of the most densely populated parts of the Earth. And this is incredibly dangerous. Now, looking at the weapons transfers that are put publicly out by the Defense Security Cooperation Agency, we can see that over 35,000 guided weapons have been provided to Israel in recent years. And that doesn't include the weapons that were provided just this year, and that right now is classified. But let's take again a look at U.S. practice. When I was in the Pentagon and conducting targeting there for the Iraq War, for example, in 2003, we were dropping munitions in Baghdad and throughout different cities in Iraq. And at no time did I ever have a weaponeer suggest to me that we should use an unguided munition. And let's take a look at a very similar conflict, right? Let's look at Raqqa in Syria, where the U.S. was involved with a lot of aerial munitions. There's a great story. There's a quote there from a pilot talking about how you have all of these buildings around a densely populated area, the enemy commingled with civilians, and the pilot asks, "How am I supposed to fly the plane and drop a bomb down an alleyway?" And the answer that the report comes up with is precision-guided munitions.
General, when President Biden described Israel's bombing campaign as indiscriminate, as he did this past week, I'd imagine you take issue with that.
Yeah, actually, I would. It was an extraordinarily unfortunate and indiscriminate use of the term indiscriminate attacks. And I think definitions are important here. In accordance with the international humanitarian law, indiscriminate attacks are defined as, first, attacks which are not directed at specific military objectives. Second, attacks which employ a means of combat that cannot be directed at a specific military objective. Or third, attacks which employ a means of combat the effects of which cannot be limited as required by international humanitarian law, and consequently are of a nature to strike military objectives and civilians or civilian objects without distinction. None of these situations apply to the Israeli Air Force.
That is retired Lieutenant General David Deptula and Mark Galasco. Thank you both for your insights.
Thank you. You bet, Jeff. Thank you.
In the day's other headlines, the Congressional Budget Office projected inflation will slow to near 2% next year. That is close to the Federal Reserve's goal, and it could pave the way for lower interest rates. The CBO also estimates that unemployment will rise to 4.4% by late next year. The nation's gross domestic product, or overall economic output, is expected to fall to a rate of 1.5% before rebounding in 2025. Homelessness in the United States has soared to its highest levels on record, more than 650,000 people. Federal data released today showed a 12% increase in January from a year earlier. The numbers are increasingly evident in Chicago, Denver, and other cities. Officials blame sharply higher rents and the end of pandemic-era assistance. European Union leaders insisted today they will ultimately get more military aid to Ukraine early next year. Germany, France, and others voiced optimism despite Hungary's veto of a $50 billion aid package. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is Russia's closest ally in the EU. He defended his position in Brussels as an EU summit ended.
We can say the situation in Ukraine is bad, so we shouldn't send any more money to finance the war. Instead, we should stop the war and have a ceasefire and peace talks. Instead of that, now they want to give money to keep the war going.
The EU aid is especially critical for Ukraine, with future U.S. assistance stuck in Congress. Meanwhile, the bloc will begin talks on letting Ukraine join, but Hungary's Orban says he may stop that process later. Russian officials now say the jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny has been moved from a penal colony east of Moscow. Confirmation came today during a court hearing. But Navalny's whereabouts whereabouts remain unknown since his lawyer lost touch with him after December 6th. Moscow is digging out from one of its biggest snowstorms in 60 years. Blizzards dumped 8 inches on the Russian capital and other parts of the country today. It amounted to more than 1/5 of Moscow's average December snowfall in just 24 hours. Forecasters say the city could get a record of nearly 20 inches this month. A bitter cold wave has plunged much of China to below freezing temperatures. Snow blanketed Beijing this week and disrupted highway travel in provinces across the north. Today, President Xi Jinping called for an all-out emergency response with conditions set to worsen over the weekend. Britain's Prince Harry scored a victory today in his legal war with British tabloids. A London court ruled the Daily Mirror used phone hacking to snoop on Harry in the early 2000s and it awarded him $180,000. Later, lawyers read a statement from the prince calling for action against publishers who abuse their power.
Today's ruling is vindicating and affirming. I've been told that slaying dragons will get you burnt, but in light of today's victory and the importance of doing what is needed for a free and honest press, it is a worthwhile price to pay.
Prince Harry's testimony in the trial was the first by a British royal in more than a century. Back in this country, former President Trump faces a new controversy over highly classified documents that disappeared as he left office. Reports today say it involves a binder of material on Russian efforts to meddle in the 2016 election. Intelligence agencies are said to be worried that secret sources and methods will be compromised. The Virginia woman whose first grader shot and wounded his teacher was sentenced today to 2 years in state prison for child neglect. Deja Taylor's son used her gun in the attack in Newport News. She'd already been sentenced to 21 months in federal prison for using marijuana while owning a gun. And on Wall Street, stocks had a mixed day but closed out another winning week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 56 points to close at 37,305. The Nasdaq rose 52 points, and the S&P 500 slipped a fraction of a point. Still to come on the News Hour, David Brooks and Ruth Marcus weigh in on the week's political headlines. And book critics share their picks for the best reads of the year.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
The landmark Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade nearly 18 months ago upended the American landscape of reproductive rights. State laws popped up restricting abortion access. An issue that became central to some elections. And we've heard many stories of confusion from patients and doctors trying to understand the new law.
A new story from the New York Times explains some of the internal dynamics of the court, from how the justices decided to hear the case to how the decision was drafted and when it was ultimately handed down. Jody Cantor is one of the authors of that report, and she joins us now. Thank you for being with us. Jody, many of the justices, including Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who was picked by Donald Trump in part to help overturn Roe, according to your reporting, initially opposed even hearing the case. What changed?
When Anna Liptak and I were reporting the story, that was one of the big surprises, because of course she did eventually vote to overturn the law, but voting whether to take the case or not is a different matter. And initially what she said was that she wanted to vote to grant, to hear the case, but that she had timing reservations, that she didn't want to hear the case at that term, which some of her conservative colleagues were pushing to do. And then months later, she actually ended up changing her vote from a grant to a deny. So it didn't make a substantive difference. You only needed 4 votes, which Justice Alito had to move the case forward. But it meant that the case moved forward with a bare minimum of the court. Only 4 votes, and by the way, those were all male justices.
There's another detail in your reporting that the justices initially voted in January of 2021 to take up the case. This was months before they publicly announced that they would hear it, and you report that it was Justice Brett Kavanaugh who pushed for a delay to create the appearance of distance from Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death. Why did he think that was important?
So one of the things that he cited was that he wanted to watch some other abortion cases play out in the lower court. that's so interesting. It pushes the case to the next term, and also it creates this appearance of distance from Justice Ginsburg's death. The court has the vote to grant, the case is clearly moving forward, and yet they essentially withhold the decision from the public for months.
And once Justice Samuel Alito wrote that draft of his opinion and sent it to his colleagues, you report that the other conservative justices quickly signed on to it without requesting any changes. And that was Alito's way, reportedly, of trying to safeguard a coalition around overturning Roe. How and why did the leak of his opinion to Politico in May of 2022, how did that cement the ruling?
So one of our discoveries is that there were really extensive attempts to craft compromises. We don't know if they would have worked. We don't know what prospect they had of succeeding. But Chief Justice John Roberts, Justice Stephen Breyer, the first thing they did is they tried to stop the case from being heard. Then when it went forward, Justice Roberts, and this is public, he's described this in oral arguments in his opinion, he had a kind of 15-week compromise where he wanted to uphold the Mississippi law, which restricted abortion to 15 weeks, but he didn't want to overturn all of Roe. And even though that was a very lonely position on this court, he only needed one more vote to make that happen. And in fact, Justice Stephen Breyer was considering joining him in that position. That would have been just symbolic. But if, say, Justice Brett Kavanaugh had joined that position as well, the entire outcome would have been different. And so the leak came just as those efforts were underway, and it rendered them hopeless. Justices' votes are secret for a reason, because they want room to change their minds, which sometimes they do before the official opinion comes out. And in this case, because everything became so public, it really cemented the results and locked them in. So we don't know who leaked this opinion, but we can say what the effect was, which was to